Okay, so there's basically two types of sync that you do in the music world when you're using MIDI stuff. There's MTC, which is called MIDI timecode, and then there's beat clock. Now, MIDI timecode is absolute time. That means that it's expressed in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. When you're working in the film world, usually everything that you sync up to a film is going to be in hours, minutes, seconds, or frames. When you are doing music stuff that you need two devices to be able to sync their tempos together, you would use beat clock. Beat clock is more like the computer snapping its fingers, and the device that's slaving to the computer would be listening to those snaps and varying its tempo based on the snaps that it gets. Okay, that's why beat clock, it's every beat is like the little snap that goes to the device. So that being said, let's see how Logic takes care of this, and also talk a little bit about how you can route MIDI back and forth between applications. So in Logic, if I go to Project Settings and go to Synchronization, here's the synchronization window. Now, when we're working with SMPTE, we're usually in the film world, which means that you get hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Usually when you're in the film world, you're going to be dealing with 24 frames a second. If you're getting a video, it'd be 2997 or 2997 drop. So when you're dealing with absolute time, you're usually writing music to picture or doing sound design to picture. Down here you have bar position 1 plays at SMPTE hour 1. Now why is it hour 1 and not hour 0? Well, usually when you're dealing with movies, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that happens before the movie actually starts. You get some information about the movie, you'll get things called color bars that are used for doing kind of video sync type stuff and calibration. And then you'll have video 2 pop, which means 2 seconds before picture starts. Now if you had, instead of using negative numbers, which is what you'd have to do if bar 1 was starting at 0, they choose to use hour 1, and then your session would start sometime before 59:58. Okay, so 59:58 being 2 seconds before picture. So yeah, when we deal with MTC, MIDI timecode, we're usually dealing with absolute time. Now, absolute time is a very, very exacting sync. It's continuous sync, and it's very good for syncing up devices, sort of absolutely, but it doesn't deal so much with tempo. So if I was to go over here to MIDI, the MIDI tab, I see it says Transmit MIDI Clock. Now, if I click on the destination here, then I get a choice of what ports I can send out to. I've got all and I've got unused. Now, here's the deal. I don't have my MIDI interface hooked up right now, so I don't have any way to send that beat clock out of the computer. If I had my MIDI interface hooked in, then I could allow it to go out one of the ports in the MIDI interface, and then that would go to your other device, and the device that it's going to, let's say it's a MTC or something like that. You would have it receiving beat clock, and then Logic would be the master and the MPC would be the slave. Now if you wanted Logic to listen to beat clock, to listen to the Akai MPC, I'm saying Akai MPC over and over again because this is important for you MPC users. I'm going to go back to General, and you see it says Auto Enable External Sync. Right now my sync mode is internal, which means that Logic is creating all the sync. If I go down to Manual, then I have to tell it what it's syncing to. MIDI timecode means that it's listening to timecode. Now if I say Auto Enable External Sync, if it receives beat clock or timecode, it's going to automatically start syncing up to the source that's spitting it out. So I'm going to go back over to MIDI. Now, beat clock. So I've got all and I've got unused, but since I don't have my MIDI interface up, I can't really send the MIDI information out. But what I can do is I can open up this program called AMS. So that's usually in your utilities, and it's audio MIDI setup. So here's what happens with this. In your audio MIDI setup, there's this thing called an IAC driver. IAC stands for Inter-Applications Connection, and it was originally used way back in the day to sync applications together. So if you wanted to do the infamous Logic Pro Tools sync, this is one way that you could do it. If I double click on the IAC driver and I say, okay, here's bus 1, blah blah blah, device is online. When I turn it online, that means that if I go back to Logic, then I'll have the ability to send, not yet, transmit MTC to IAC driver bus 1, transmit clock to IAC driver bus 1. Now what that's doing is it's actually sending MIDI clock and MIDI timecode through AMS, and any other application that you have open that can listen to MIDI timecode or listen to beat clock will sync to Logic, and vice versa. When you create that IAC driver, they can start sending information to Logic as well. So anyway, those are the basics of sync. So it's important to remember that there's MTC, which is MIDI timecode, and it is basically continuous. It is hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And of course, an hour never changes its duration. An hour is an hour. A minute is a minute. A second is a second. I know this sounds very zen. Now, in timecode, or in beat clock, you're transmitting a continuous click, and the other application is following the click. So if I slow down, the other application is going to automatically change its tempo to match Logic. So anyway, there's a little something about synchronization. Give it a try, and if you have any questions, go ahead and post me a comment. Now, here's the other thing. I've used MPCs with Logic before, and essentially the MPC doesn't act like a normal, now I could be totally wrong about this because I haven't used them in a while, but the MPC is basically a self-contained unit. And the way that most of the producers that I know use MPCs is they will write on the MPC, they'll have Logic slaved to the MPC, and then they'll basically either dump all their MIDI tracks in off the MPC, or they will record the audio directly into Logic, because the MPC doesn't act like a normal MIDI controller and MIDI device where you can like set Logic up with an MPC and then hit your notes on the keyboard and it triggers everything in the MPC. It doesn't quite work all that way. And then setting up the MPC so you can use the pads to control other instruments, I've never gotten that to work right. So that being said, I'm hoping that I can get out to my buddy's house, one of my students, and kind of check out what's happening in the newer MPC land. But until our next cartoon, I think that's about as much time as I got. So have a good time, and I may be posting another one on sculpture this week, but the synchronization issues were the ones that was the issue that you guys were asking about the most. Little bonus question. What does SMPTE stand for? MTC, MIDI timecode, is based off of SMPTE. What does it mean? It means Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. Alright, there you go. A little synchronization for you. Take care. Ciao.